Welcome, everybody, to the show. Thank you for joining us tonight. Along with me here is my co-host and fellow traveler, Dan, the Dan Noodles, man, the Barry Manilow of Wargaming. How's it going tonight, Dan?
I was going to quote a Barry Manilow commercial. Take a break today or something. I don't know. Whatever. It's going. How's it going with you?
It's all right. It's going good. There's a lot going on, let me put it that way. But other than that, everything is great. So we thought we would just kind of fly duel here tonight and talk about SPI versus Avalon Hill.
Can I say something before we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a plug for No Enemies here.
Okay.
William Aaron, for God's sakes, man, get in touch with me. I'm going to write you a letter with real ink, real fountain pen, and real paper, and I'm gonna mail it to you, man.
And real anthrax.
No, okay, no, because he won the clip of the week, man.
Oh, you have a clip of the week. Awesome.
I got a clip of the week, man.
Clip of the week.
Yeah, I didn't want to make it too difficult, but then what's her name? Forgot. Kabuki Kid was like, "Come on, Dan, make it harder than that." And I'm like, "All right, then."
All right. What's the prize?
The prize is a handwritten letter with real ink.
An anthrax.
From a fountain pen and Tomoe River paper. Anybody in the know knows.
Okay. Awesome. Anyway.
That's what I'm saying. All right?
Tune in to No Enemies here at midnight on Saturday morning, folks. So for some reason, it's germane that Dick Butkus has passed away, apparently.
Who's he?
Per fucko here. I'm trying to think if maybe you're just like not aware of Dick Butkus because of your Canadianness.
No, but don't tell me that's a real name.
Dick Butkus, yeah, absolutely. He was.
That's a real name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, are you kidding me or what?
No, he was an American football player,
and his name was Dick Butkus. You don't see the humor in that.
It's possible I might have thought that was hilarious in 1978, but I know who Dick Butkus was.
I've heard of that name before, but I thought it was a joke, like Monty Python's biggest dickus there, and you know what I'm saying.
Well, that makes sense. Nope, that's Dick Butkus. And there's also a Mike Ditka, but Mike Ditka's still around.
Mike Ditka, I know. The head like this, man.
A little bit, yeah. So anyway, but didn't know that. But in any case, so I started with SPI right around 1980 or 81.
So what was the game?
Whatever that was. Paratroop. It was an S&T number 78 or 79, I want to say.
Oh, you're going there. So that was SPI. S&T was their magazine.
That's what I started with, yeah. But then by the time I became aware of what was going on, SPI was gone, right? They had been absorbed by TSR, devoured, if you like, by TSR. So, well, those things were floating around in the early 80s. I didn't really see SPI anymore. And I don't recall that the local hobby store had even the Spitzer stuff, to be completely honest about it. So Dan, what's your email address?
Well, William, it's actually very easy. It's No Enemies Here at Videotron.
Videotron.ca.
Yeah, No Enemies Here, one word, at Videotron.ca. And if you didn't take it down, William, you can go on my YouTube channel and go on About Me, and you should have my email there.
So it shouldn't be that difficult. And William, thanks for the support. It is much appreciated. So by the time I again became sort of aware of things and was able to go to the local hobby store and see stuff, SPI was gone, but Avalon Hill was of course around. And back in the day, you could get Avalon Hill stuff at like J.C. Penney's and things like that. Big department stores. You could get that stuff there. That's
Really?
long ago. But
Like, what kind of games did you get by Avalon Hill there?
I mean, they wouldn't have a lot, but they'd have a couple of things, right? So whatever they ended up with. So, but I'm like scratching my brain for the memories of what I remember seeing. Yeah, this is a fair point. What I remember seeing there, right? I do remember what's now called the Commander's Edition Starfleet Battles. I remember seeing that there. I remember seeing Harn's stuff there. I remember seeing a lot of stuff like the West End and Mayfair lines of war games and/or board games.
At J.C. Penney's.
No, this was the local hobby store.
Okay.
But SPI was gone, right? So what wargaming I played throughout the rest of the 80s was pretty much Avalon Hill, right? Because that's what we could get. Maybe there may have been a GDW thing in there as well, but so I feel like even though I started with SPI, that I kind of grew up more so on Avalon Hill, and I wonder if this is kind of like a DC versus Marvel thing where you got fans of one or the other that just didn't really dabble very much with the other. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it seemed that when we had Doc on and I asked him SPI or Avalon Hill, he was like SPI.
So SPI was around for 15 years, I think a little less than 15 years. And Avalon Hill was around like clear back to like 1950, the 50s, all the way to 1998 or so, right? So SPI is around for a much smaller period of time, and yet their like output, if you just go look at SPI versus Avalon Hill on BGG,
it's huge, man.
The output that they had is very similar in terms of numbers. So it's like 200 or 300 or something like that. Games, right? So they cranked games out a lot faster. I mean, remember back in the day, it was usual to see only one new Avalon Hill game release every year, right? That was their like modus operandi until maybe the mid 70s, and even then we would only get a couple of things out a year. And so whereas SPI, you'd have magazines, box games, and all that stuff.
How often would they put out their flat pack games? Like, what, once a month?
So there's two different I think bi-monthly, but there's two different flat pack formats actually. And I don't have an example of one of them, the early one, the white box, SPI white box. This was like, it was very similar form-wise to the plastic flat tray. But it was just literally like a white cardboard box in that shape. And then it was like sort of some kind of internal compartment you could take apart and put the counters in. And it was a total mess. The SPI flat trays, the ones that we think of when we hear that now, those came around in the early 70s, like 73 or so, 74 maybe. And those stayed with SPI pretty much till the very end. But after a while, the expectation began to be, we're going to have like boxes, right? And Avalon Hill's kind of standard of box games turned into much more the standard across hobby gaming, not even just inside wargaming, right? Because remember that even like TSR and the RPG companies, I can pull box sets off the RPG shelf right now that are basically the same kind of boxes that you buy an Avalon Hill game in, right? The dimensions are a little different. So that has proved to be an enduring format, right? And it looks good on the shelf. So there's that.
But why? First of all, who was in charge of SPI back then?
Dunnigan.
And where did
this is actually true. There's a sort of middle step between the two where there's a plastic interior in a white outside as well, and that was also pretty unsatisfactory. But I don't know what I didn't like dig up what the price of an Avalon Hill game was at any given date, right? But you could definitely, the magazine games definitely were very affordable. That was kind of the point, right? They came out on a regular basis. They were often developed very quickly. They were often experimental, right? Avalon Hill, I mean, can you think of an Avalon Hill game that was experimental? I can't.
Well, hold on. I'm thinking of, well, when you say experimental, it was a launching platform for RAF. It was Battle of Britain by John Butterfield.
RAF was West End Games.
Yeah, but still, that's, and then it was picked up by Decision Games.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that never went through the hands of SPI or
sorry,
Avalon
I'm
Hill.
going cross-platform here.
That's okay. That's so funny you should mention that, though, because we do have an interesting intermediary step there as well in this, and I didn't plan this. It's been sitting on the shelf for a while. In this game from TSR,
right?
This is John Butterfield,
right?
So, and I mean, if you look at this, it'll feel, I mean, to some extent that's topical, right? It'll feel like, hey, this is like clearly an ancestor of RAF, right?
Yes.
And I'm not sure whether that came out before RAF or not. I think it did, but I could be wrong about that. Stalingrad 299. This is so that's really, really, really early though.
What's that?
I assume we're talking about the Avalon Hill Stalingrad, which in the flat box, but that would have been the price that it guy had in the like early 60s.
$2.99.
Mm-hmm. Simonson was sort of the manager at SPI for a while, but I'm reluctant to comment on whose title was who and exactly what their responsibilities were. We had a whole show on that, however. Go check that out with those folks. So I do too. I've got at least one SPI catalog.
Oh yeah, I've got them a lot.
I could probably, this is researchable, right? I could find an SPI catalog from 1980 and an Avalon Hill catalog from 1980 and compare prices. I would guess that Avalon Hill's prices were higher, but I wouldn't necessarily put $5 on that without checking it. And somebody mentioned up thread, and if I'm sorry, I have to weed through the Dick Butkus commentary here. Wolf Dog says first SPI was War of the Ring, which, hey, that ain't a bad choice right there. First game in a 3-inch box. SPI didn't do 3-inch boxes, and neither did Avalon Hill. First game in a 3-inch box may have been Pacific War from Victory Games. 3-inch bookcase box. The only earlier example would have been, and it's not a bookcase box, it's in a flat SPI flat box or Avalon Hill flat box. The Longest Day, which is I believe a 2-inch box, might be 2.5, something like that. Anyway, Avalon Hill was owned by their printer, right? Charlie Roberts back in the day ended up owing a bunch of money to the printer, and he ended up, instead of just folding, he ended up selling the company to the printer. And that's Monarch Avalon, the Dot family business. And that they ran the company then until they decided to sell it for $27 worth of beads in 1998.
What a shame.
The Hasbro. Yeah, they were going to retire, so they got out and got what money they could. And Hasbro probably had more money than anybody else, but if you looked, I forget what the actual number was that they sold out for, but it's a number that would seem ludicrously low now.
You said you knew someone who went after Hasbro to see if they can get the games printed and or have the license for it, and the guy said it's not even worth our lawyer's time type thing.
Well, they didn't blow the person off. They actually got somebody on the phone and gave him an answer, and they said they don't know. They're like Hasbro Legal didn't even know what the IP rights is, because they got you got to demonstrate that. You got to have the paper trail, and they don't have the paper trail. So SPI soapboxes are 4-inch boxes, though. Actually, a little over 4 inches. So we asked about a 3-inch box, and SPI like bookcase boxes were either 1 inch, 2 inches, or 3 inches. And I have examples of all three sizes on the shelf behind me. So these two are 1-inch boxes. And interestingly, a lot of this is one where this is the Power Politics series. These are supposed to have been like a little fancier, but a lot of these will have blank backs. They won't have done art on the bottom, to save a nickel or two. So we saw a lot more experimentation out of. I mean, that was the whole reason for S&T in the first place, right? Was so that they could do experimental games and try different stuff, and we really saw that. Now, and a lot of the really successful games ended up with Avalon Hill anyway, right? Because SPI would sell Avalon Hill a game here or there.
Ardy, those big box games there, the Next War and the War in the Pacific, those are huge monster games. I don't remember Avalon Hill having such a category.
Generally, they didn't. There are a couple exceptions. The probably the biggest monster thing that Avalon Hill did, I'm thinking to make sure I'm not missing something, which I might be, is The Longest Day. Very large game, and as Scott Bell mentions, Tom Shaw was the honcho for quite a long time at Avalon Hill after Monarch Avalon took over, and I think he was with the company with Charlie Roberts, and then he's the guy that stayed on.
Is Tom Shaw still around?
He's still alive. He's no longer working for them. I can tell you that. As far as I know, he's still alive. Let me put it that way.
I wonder how to get in touch with that guy, because I'm sure
that'd be a catch. If we get Tom.
I know, it'd be fun. I'll try something.
All right, awesome. Elysia, I don't know if I'd call that a big monster game, though. I mean, certainly, I don't think it's in the same category as any of these. That's not something that's necessarily super quick to play. There's also Siege of Jerusalem, which is also bigger, but that was later as well. That was a surprisingly late game, as I recall. But no, I don't. Generally, while SPI would do monster games, Avalon Hill generally didn't. But I would also say that, like, in terms of complexity, that Avalon, this is a can of worms here, right? Because Avalon Hill did a lot of games that weren't war games, and SPI did only a couple games that weren't war games, right? So Avalon Hill had a whole line, and you look at their catalog, half their catalog is sports games and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm sure I have a catalog around here, for God's sake.
That 1812 game is actually really, really neat. As I recall, it is not I'm like, oh, this smells like a Dunnigan design. As I recall, it's actually somebody else. That SPI 1812 is actually really neat. It's on my personal wish list. Hello, Wall. There you go. Kilroy is here. $33 for Atlantic Wall. Yeah. So of the ones on the shelf behind me, Next War and War in the Pacific are unpunched. The other three are punched. So everything else on that SPI shelf is actually punched, except for Next War and War in the Pacific.
Are you planning on dying with those games?
I actually hope to play Atlantic Wall, and I have played War in Europe, so I don't feel bad, and I probably like to try Operation Typhoon as well at some point. But as somebody that likes bigger games, right? That if you're going to be engaged in sort of war game archaeology, if you will, digging old stuff up, Avalon Hill didn't do that many bigger games. They did some sort of quasi-big games. I mean, Third Reich is a bit of a project to play. Even Guns of August is kind of a project to play. That's probably a 50-hour game, Guns of August. Takes longer to play than Third Reich. Right? So
my first game was...
both of these gentlemen were geniuses, in my opinion. What's that, Dan? First game?
My first game was Panzer Leader, man. And at that same game store that we have in Montreal, the Jack of Hearts there, Le Valet de Coeur, and they have a wicked game war game section, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, Marc Rodrigue works there part-time, so I think he pumps it up, man. Yeah.
Oh, you mean Mark Rodrigue?
Rodrigue.
Right, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Right, that guy.
Yeah, him.
Anyway, so David Imperato used to play War in Europe and the Next War on the basement floor. I mean, it's hard to. Next War is not as big. I could easily get the Next War on the table that I have. I wouldn't have to like buy tables or make a special table arrangement to get the Next War on a table in the room back here. War in Europe, I would have to. That's a project. If you have three, I think 2.5 by 8 tables, I think it'll fit on that. But you might have to have a bump out for Spain. It's big. It's 7 herbs, something like that. Maps. So
SPI sold Panzerblitz to Avalon Hill.
Indeed, they did, and a bunch of other stuff too. I mentioned that it feels like. So this is a somewhat unsupported statement because I haven't spoken to the principals involved. That when SPI was particularly pinched for money, they would go to Avalon Hill and sell them some games, rustle up some working capital. And Panzerblitz was one of those. Remember, Panzerblitz starts as like tactical game number 3. It's an early S&T game. And it turns into Panzerblitz. And the next version that's published is Panzerblitz, is like the Avalon Hill Panzerblitz. But Panzer Group Guderian was like that. Panzer Army Africa was like that. These are S&T games that Avalon Hill republished as box games. Conquistador was on that list. There were also boxed games that SPI did that were redone by Avalon Hill just as box games. Freedom in the Galaxy is the obvious one that I'm thinking of there. And War in the East. Yeah, War in the East. So the maps between War in the East first and second edition, the maps are projected differently. I've never set up War in the East first edition and don't have it, and I'm not going to get it. So, but they changed the map projection when they made it War in Europe, or War in Europeable, if you will, and redid the maps for the second edition. So. We also played War in Europe in the 90s by sticking it to a wall. Then we used that little blue glue tack stuff to hold the counters on. That didn't work that well. I will just point out, did not work that well. But it was one way to do it, right? For a game that was very difficult to manage, right? What are you painting miniatures there?
Oh no, I was texting my wife to bring me 2 pills and a glass of water.
There you go.
It was one of those days.
There you go. Yeah. Only 4 maps. It's a Wii game. When it flips to the second edition, I think the East Front is basically 3 maps. And then the West Front is basically 3 maps. But remember, it goes all the way down to North Africa at that point too. So, and I think the maps are different sized as well. I could be wrong about that. So what was your?
What you're talking about? You spoke about your first SPI purchase, which was Strategy and Tactics magazine. But what was your first Avalon Hill game? Come on, man! You got to remember.
I don't have a clear recollection of that because it was those couple of S&T games, and then it was RPGs for a while. It may have been Squad Leader. That's possible. That was certainly one that I had very early. A lot of the old Avalon Hill games that I had back in the day, I have reacquired, but I can't think of one that I had before Squad Leader.
And why did you do that? Why did you why do we do that? Why do we reacquire?
In some cases, it's because I want to play it again, right? In some cases, it's friggin' nostalgia. I mean, let's face it. It's totally that. I mean, I probably was attracted to Squad Leader by the topic and by the, it seemed like a very deluxe thing at the time because it had a lot of pieces and was real complicated and all that. So a lot of people cut their teeth on stuff like Panzer Blitz, Panzer Leader. People who started wargaming in the 70s, I think a lot of them started with Panzer Blitz. So Kilroy said Panzer Leader, which is
actually
Panzer Blitz on the West Front.
It was and it was there was two games. It was that and there was Luftwaffe.
Luftwaffe and Richthofen's War. Two games I have never played, by the way, is Luftwaffe and Richthofen's War. That's why
I just recently got that. I will show you.
Why does he turn his camera off to do this? Louis Goldberg says D-Day. D-Day was out in the 60s, though. So and I wasn't. So I think D-Day was the first, am I remembering this correctly? The first war game with a hex grid as opposed to a square grid. I thought this was 7, but maybe it's 9. It could be 9. Maybe I'm thinking of War in the Pacific, which might be 7.
From the library of Paradis.
There you go. Ricky's War. They are not rare, folks. Do not pay $50 for a copy of Ricky's War or Luftwaffe.
Really,
No, they're very common. Very common. They're almost always, now, if you like find it in the shrink wrap and it's mint, that's different, right? That's the same thing with Panzer Blitz. People played those. They're very rare in the shrink wrap or even just unpunched. People played those. The Creature That Ate Sheboygan. Who was the designer? Was that an Eric Goldberg? It may or may not say on the box.
It doesn't say on the box.
You'd think it would. SPI was usually good about that. Avalon Hill was not. That was the source of actually some friction with Chaosium as well when Avalon Hill started doing RuneQuest. As Chaosium traditionally would put the...
That's who the designer is.
Who? Eric Goldberg?
Chaosium.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right thinking about it. I should have remembered that correctly. And of course, a bunch of other people have said that in the chat as well. Meandering Mike and Eric Hansen. And I'm not sure what I was thinking of with Eric Goldberg. I think I might probably thinking of Dragon Quest. There you go. Early Mark Simonich game.
Yeah, that's what I think it's first, isn't it? Thank you.
I'd have to check on that, but it's certainly one of his first. That's the game that was recently redone as North Africa 41, for what it's worth. So I've never played The Creature That Ate Sheboygan either. So I didn't come back around to SPI until the early 90s, probably the very early 90s, when I did pick up a couple odds and ends that had crept into my hands. And mostly those were S&T games because you could get them cheaply. But one of the things that I did end up with was War of the Ring in the flat. It was actually the Middle-earth Trilogy pack, which if you have it, it's nice, but you don't need it because the other two games in the tri-pack are not really very good. The War of the Ring is actually a pretty cool game, I think.
Christ, the Simonich game is not even punched.
Look at that. Those look pretty good. Was that Rhino Games on that?
Terran Games.
Terran Games?
Yeah. Hold on.
Terran Games. I'm blanking on them. I was thinking Rhino Games. And what the hell did they do?
Rhino Games.
Apparently Rhino...
Wasn't it Gygax?
No, definitely not. Terran Games was run by Chester Hendricks. And they did 4 things, all of which do appear to be... 2 of which appear to be just war games. The other thing they did was Bastogne or Bust, which was a Chester Hendricks design. And then Rhino Games did a little bit more, but not much. They did less than I remember, actually. Campaign to Stalingrad, Decision in France, and Legend Begins in North Africa. Appears to be all Rhino games managed to get out. There's also Panther games, which I kind of have trouble keeping that straight too. Panther games did. I'm trying to think of an example of a Panther games game.
I've got an image in my face there.
The Trial of Strength.
Oh, that's right. Didn't Lock and Load pick it up?
Well, they were going to redo it, but I'm not clear on exactly what is going on with Lock and Load Publishing right now, to be completely honest about it. And I don't know that Panther Games also did a game that only did like 2 or 3 things. Neil Badke really likes the Legend Begins, and I heard good things about it too. Oh, so that's from Tactica y Strategia. And I don't really know anything about their stuff. I have no visibility on it. Does that come from the library of Carl Parody as well? Yeah, I figured. Yeah, are there English rules in there?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. So you don't have to learn Polish to play it.
No, and the bloody language is difficult.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been told. Dark Commando 1983, thanks for stopping by. Grunwald 1410. Yeah, they've got some interesting graphic design that's, I think, I don't know that I like it, but it's punchy and attention getting, and that's good.
I think it's the guy's son, the guy who owns Tactics and Strategy. I think it's a son who does them.
Oh, the graphics? Oh, maybe. I don't know. So Jeff Baylor says that between them, Avalon Hill and SPI created Wargames as a hobby and as a fandom, and also started Origins. This is true. They also did start Origins, and then they kind of handed it over to Gamma at some point. I forget what the exact chronology is on that. In the 70s, we start to see other people doing war games. Technically the late 60s, because Rand was actually doing some stuff that early, but we start to see in 72, 73, we start to see your GDWs and other companies like that emerge. But the hobby is sort of the center of gravity in the hobby is between SPI and Avalon Hill.
And how long did Charles S. Robert? How long did was he there till the end?
No. He sold it in the early 60s, as I recall, maybe 65, something like that. And he retired from gaming at that point and wrote books about the railroad, or the railroads, I should say.
Yeah, because I think he used to work for the railroads.
I believe that to be the case. Yeah, Jedco was pretty early as well. Yeah, that's a good catch on Mark Hodgkinson's part. Ariel was also around too, but I'd have to look into Ariel and see exactly what they were doing and when they started. But they started reasonably early as well. I'd be very curious to see, are there any companies from the UK that were publishing as early as the mid 70s, or France, for example? I mean, your Ve Victuses and your Hexasims certainly don't date that early.
Hey, Mark is in the house.
I'm aware. It's interesting to kind of juxtapose the differences between SPI and Avalon Hill, right? SPI would knock games out like, 10, 15 games a year, and Avalon Hill would release 2, right? To some extent, Avalon Hill games were developed a little more carefully, but there's exceptions to that too, right? Where they would knock games out in a over lunch, over 3 martini lunch, and be done with it, right? Kriegspiel, the Avalon Hill Kriegspiel was like that. That was
I hear that's a crappy game
written on the back of a napkin. I've had other people say that they actually think there's something interesting there. I don't see it, but then again, it's clearly not a game that is aimed at me. So there's that. So the earliest thing that GDW did was Dragonok Austin, which would have been 70. I want to say 73, unless it was 72. So that's possible. Ed Holtzman is here. This is true, and actually that's why I thought of Ariel. I'm not sure Britannia is a UK design. That's a Lou Pulsifer design. He is not from the UK, unless he's an American that was living in the UK at the time. But Kingmaker is absolutely a UK design. That was Ariel. So, I mean, Britannia is just about the UK, or not even the pre-UK, I suppose.
What's worth more on the secondary market, SPI or Avalon Hill games?
Interesting question. I think there's a wider range of SPI because you could still get the magazines, the S&T magazines, in some cases even unpunched for as little as $10, depending on the exact magazine. And it's hard to find an Avalon Hill game in comparable condition for less than 30 or 40. But it does depend on title too. Pat Mullen, thank you so much. Much appreciated. He says SPI made some classics, but owning a lot of the flat tray games. He thinks big picture, a lot of the brilliant ones get mentioned, but there was a lot of Avalon Hill at a better quality rate. This is absolutely the impression that I have. And I mean, a lot of the best. Thanks for the support. That's much appreciated too, of course. I think, again, remembering that the SPI's output was higher, right? And you could tell, right, especially with the magazine games, where a lot of them just didn't get fully baked. Nevertheless, there was a lot of enduring classics in there too. And I think it's kind of a testament to the strength of the folks that were working at SPI that we had as many really good games land from them as we did, considering how rushed some of them felt, right? It was especially the magazine games, obviously. So, but I think if you look at the war games specifically from Avalon Hill and kind of just move the other stuff to one side, I think the average quality is probably higher. Game quality is probably higher from Avalon Hill. Certainly the production quality, there was sort of a luxury thing going on with the mounted maps. Remember that until relatively, I guess it wasn't that late, but the earliest non-mounted Avalon Hill maps that I could think of, the earliest example would be Empires in Arms. I think Siege of Jerusalem came later. And then the GCACW games came later. And then the ASL historicals that had paper maps instead of mounted maps came later. But up to that point, everything was mounted, right? To a greater or lesser success rate, right? Some of the mounting was garbage, but there's that. Triplanetary Chaco. Triplanetary and Chaco, I want to say, are both Mark Miller designs. DNO is Frank Chadwick and John. I forget Frank Chadwick and the collaborators. Simulations Canada, not quite that early, but yeah, they were.
Wasn't Carrie Anderson part of Simulations Canada?
I believe Carrie Anderson was Simulations Canada, as far as I'm aware.
That's East Coast. He's in the West Coast.
Well, I don't know where the hell he is. Yeah, Lou Pulsifer. Lou Pulsifer did his doctorate in the UK. I don't think I knew that. So I'd have to look and see who Britannia came from. I haven't checked that. So this is also true. Print runs on Avalon Hill were typically larger. And this is another thing, right? And SPI would keep stuff in print too, but Avalon Hill would keep stuff in print for sometimes 25 years. This is why games like Luftwaffe and Richthofen's War are so easy to get, and Panzerblitz, for that matter, are so easy to get because they were in print for decades, right? And they printed huge quantities of them. So yeah, damn it. Louis Goldberg's right. SimCannon was Steve Newberg, actually.
From Nova Scotia,
yeah. Well, I don't know where in Canada he's from, but he's in Canada.
Come on, Canada.
And Stephen Newberg's still around too. He's still doing stuff. He's got something in the pipeline for Compass. I forget, Lawrence of Arabia, something like that. But a bunch of the SimCan stuff has popped up as new versions in Paper Wars. So, this is kind of an interesting cage match. You got your Redmond Simonson SPI look versus your Roger McGowan Avalon Hill look, right? That's an interesting way to juxtapose that. I think a lot of those 70s and late 70s and early 80s, especially, Roger McGowan covers from Avalon Hill are really, really iconic.
Yeah.
But Simonson was top to bottom, right? He would do the packaging design and the maps and the player aids and all that stuff. So, and I think Simonson was absolutely a genius who had a huge impact on the actual functional play of the game, right? So they saw the game as like a top to bottom thing where the graphic design, the physical systems design, he called it, was a huge component of game quality. Empires in Arms is a Harry Rowland game and originally was published by Australian Design Group. That is correct. And it's a map that is bigger than the average Avalon Hill map. And I imagine that's why they didn't mount it. Jeff Miller says Gibson's did Britannia. Okay. So, yeah. Civilization may have come over from was there I'd have to look. So the original Civilization is a Francis Tresham game. And Avalon Hill wasn't the original publisher of Diplomacy either. So
and Escape from Colditz?
I feel like that was much later, but I could be wrong.
I think so.
Find out. We can find out. I mean, it is Gibson's. So I am showing that the original edition of this was published in 1973.
Escape from Colditz.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and that would have been Gibson's at that point, actually. I really feel like that really feels like a more contemporary game, but I'm sure I'm thinking of the relatively recent Osprey version, right? So
that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And they also have that submarine.
Absolutely iconic. That iconic cover. I mean, I think that cover is part of the reason that image has become so iconic, actually. I don't agree with this necessarily. But it clearly there was I mean, it clearly wasn't Redmond Simonson, right? Let me put it that way. I want to say,
and it clearly wasn't Roger McGowan.
Oh, no. I know the fellow who did but the fellow who did the name of the guy who did a lot of the graphics for Victory Games, and I'm trying to remember who it was. They were pretty variable, I thought, in terms of map quality and counter quality as well. Apparently, Ted Kohler did a lot of the graphics for Victory Games.
Well, I mean, look, the Victory Games, what's it called? Ambush.
Mm-hmm.
I remember all the Ambush. I remember Ambush being out with all its modules, but it didn't appeal to me, the cover, because it just looked too cartoony, and I passed like an idiot.
So I mean, I'm just kind of scrolling through the covers here, and I do think there's like wide variability. I think some of them are quite strong covers. One example here, I'm going to pull a couple up that I think is a quite strong. As soon as it comes up here, there's a good one. There's a good one. There's one that's not as good. There's one that's not as good. It's interesting also to look at Victory Games and realize how few games they did.
Wasn't that Mark Herman's baby?
Mark Herman ran Victory Games. Yeah, we're gonna share here.
Yeah, I have NATO. What is it? NATO 1980 or the next war in Europe? NATO.
Yeah. So I think this is actually a very strong cover. To be completely honest, I think that's a great cover. I think this is a really good cover. Actually,
that's an awesome cover.
Yeah, I think that's a great cover. Now,
and
there's a lot of this text at the bottom that's kind of there's this text at the bottom that's a little harder to read, at least in this photograph. But the title is, you know exactly what it's about. It's a great, piece of art. Here's another cover that I think was way less awesome. So,
I don't like that one too much.
It's not. It's far from. It's far from the worst war game cover ever. Okay,
That's true.
but um, but um, it's not great. It looks just kind of generic. I think this is not a great cover. Mark's probably gonna be
No,
mad at me about this.
no,
I think this is not a great cover. I think it's
no,
putting the title in the middle of the box. I think
no.
is like visually confusing. And then you got sort of this tank at the bottom that also draws the eye to the bottom of the box, and you have what kind of looks like a like negative space up here at the top, and it's really not. I don't
No,
like this cover.
very
Uh,
bad.
this is the game you're probably talking about. This is
That's
the
the one
first
I'm talking
Maxwell
about.
Classic. This was the first game they published as Victory Games. And I think this is a very good cover, actually. I like this cover a lot. This one, not so much. I mean,
It's confusing, that one.
I kind of see what they're trying to do here, but I
Yes,
feel like this is visually confusing, right?
yes.
So, this is I don't put this way. This is not wrong, okay? But I don't put this way because I think there's more information to convey than that. But there is a sense in which I think that Avalon Hill and SPI kind of cross pollinated, and that ended up with as Victory Games. But I also feel like SPI was the more influential of the two in that relationship, or
Yes, I would
in
agree
that
with
genesis. And I also feel like Victory Games very much and immediately established their own trajectory that was independent of either SPI or Avalon Hill. There is a distinct Victory Games feel, look and feel, and design wise feel that I thought that Victory Games established. And again, they weren't really even around that long. So
you.
I think the counters in Hell's Highway are some of the worst I've ever, in terms of physical usability. I think they're some of the worst I've ever seen. Apparently, there
NATO,
was a what's that?
NATO, the next war. I was just going back to what you were saying. Uh, the first game that came out, that was the first game I saw a paper map in, and I thought it was cheap.
I wonder to what extent people thought that was the case back then, because remember SPI always had paper maps. The Not always. They did do some mounted maps as well, but usually they did. The Great State, the Power Politics series had mounted maps, and they did a occasional. There's like a designer series or something like that that also had mounted maps. Definitely not, because if we look at the chronology, Nate, like I said, NATO was 1983. Ambush was, I believe, later than that at least. Ambush was 1983. Gulf Strike, I thought Gulf Strike was later, but I could be nuts. Gulf Strike was 1983. So hell, I guess so. But I do know, and I know this because Mark told us that that their first thing was NATO. So I think that is the first year's stuff. And Hell's Highway was 1983 as well. So, and I think the Hell's Highway, I'm not going to show the Hell's Highway cover because demonetized and all that. But I think that is I think it's a striking cover, but I also think it's also got that sort of weird bottom heaviness from the negative space at the top. So the show has not. No, what's going on? Dan, oh, you're still there. Everything's good.
Yep.
Yeah, I think this is reductive, but I think this is true, right? Victory Games did a lot of innovation. And kind of starting from where SPI had left off, though, right? Where SPI is innovating out of nothing, right? Out of existing stuff that they had seen from Avalon Hill back in the day. And the like the state of the hobby in 1983 is way different than it is in 1973, right? So and Avalon Hill was out of Baltimore or near Baltimore anyway. So where SPI was in New York City in Manhattan, as I recall.
And
So
what, they had their own printing press too, SPI?
that's bad. No. They had their offices in Manhattan. So, which seems absolutely insane now, considering what it costs to
It's ridiculous.
you
I
know,
don't
just
even
to
see it.
eat lunch in Manhattan. It's hideously expensive. So
Jesus.
it seems absolutely bizarre that that a war game company can afford to have an office in
In
Manhattan.
Manhattan.
Yeah. So I do like where'd it go? David Imperato liked the cover to Pacific War, and I actually think the Pacific War cover is pretty good too. But like I said, I felt like it was a little back and forth on cover awesomeness with victory games, where with some rare exceptions, kind of everything from SPI had that sort of uniform Redmond Simonson look, right? At least on the exterior packaging, and they were a little more experimental when it came to the maps and stuff. So, and of course, there's the all-time Victory Games classic. Look at that schmuck on the camel. So yeah, I like the Pacific War cover. I don't like the Tokyo Express cover. I think it looks like a comic book. Looks like a comic book page.
You see what
I
I'm
don't
talking
think it
about?
works. So, but
And
I'd be curious about this. This might be a Mark Herman question because he participated in those. So Lewis Goldberg says they couldn't afford that office, and I guess that's true, right? So forgetting VG's Dr. Ruth game, I didn't forget it. I just didn't talk about it. So,
and Mark said that was his biggest selling game.
Oh yeah, it was the big multimedia empire of the time. Panzerblitz is also an iconic cover. There's no doubt about that. I would say I'm trying to think of like iconic covers. Part of the reason they're iconic is because they're games that everybody played too, right? The Panzerblitz cover, the Squad Leader cover, this, that kind of stuff. Where there's less of a game, there's less examples of games that were universally played from SPI, right? Probably the closest is probably Panzer Group Guderian, and that went to Avalon Hill, right? And had a great longevity from Avalon Hill. So
hey, Ardy,
yeah, Joe Prez, you're Jeff Baylor. Yeah, you're right. Joe Prez might know. So as he was with SPI back in the day too.
Hey, Joe Kombanwa. Hey, next week you want to do an iconic cover show?
We could.
And how are we going to do that? Like, flash it nice on the screen.
Well, I can do that.
And
I just need some amount of time to set it up. That's all. When I do that, I just download the cover from BGG and put it up as a slide.
Next week I got time off. You can teach me how to do it, and I could set up. I don't know, what is it? Some sort of script or something?
No. Yes, you have to write a program to do it.
For God's sakes, man! You know what I mean?
I double click on the file and it opens up in Windows Photos, and I can go forward and backward with the arrow keys. It's not complicated.
Is it going to be as ugly as what you had shown before?
No, it wouldn't be, because when I am prepared, I actually have it set up as a slideshow and not. You can do a pretty good simulacrum of slideshow in StreamYard, so we can do it. Yeah, let's set it up. That's actually not a terrible idea. The Panzer Leader covers, of course, we've talked about this. It's a classic cover. There's so many classic. I think for me at least, if I was going to do like a 10 most iconic covers in Wargaming, maybe we'll talk about this next week. Probably 8 of them are Roger McGowan covers.
Absolutely. Panzer Blitz, Squad Leader.
Yeah, Guns of August is one of my favorites out of the Avalon Hill days. I can't call Iron Bottom Sound iconic, but it's an awesome cover. It's one of my personal favorites. I think once Roger started doing covers for Avalon Hill, I think their covers got a lot better. And I will only Wow. Okay, so I'm going to pull something else up here just to show you how friggin' bad a Avalon Hill cover could be. Napoleon at Bay.
That's ugly,
Avalon Hill,
man.
Napoleon at Bay. This looks like it was drawn by one of the Dot's grandchildren.
Oh my God.
I mean, I don't know what this is from. Maybe it's even a period painting, but this dude looks like he's wearing blue jeans and cowboy boots. And it's absolutely amateurish. Every other version of Napoleon at Bay has
What's
a
he
better
sitting
cover.
on, a pizza?
It's an absolute, and he's in this leopard print saddle with like no tacking at all. I don't know what's up with that. It's an absolutely
Oh
bizarre
my
cover.
God, that's hilarious.
So
You know, a cover that blew my mind was a new Austerlitz. Do you know that you just see the tree in the fog, and that's all you see? And I think it's Austerlitz, isn't it? God,
I don't know what game you're talking about. So.
isn't it a Simon's game?
Napoleon's Triumph?
Ay, Christ.
That is Austerlitz. So
Yeah, no, it's not Austerlitz.
That's not what the cover looks like. So I don't know. But generally those are pretty. I don't know. I think it's a good cover. I'm not sure it's a great cover. I think Vietnam, Victory Games Vietnam is a good cover too. But not a great cover. But on the other hand, it does have what Flashpoint Golan doesn't, where it has kind of an eye catchiness that the Flashpoint Golan cover does not have. That's true of either the Korean War cover or the Vietnam cover or the Civil War cover, frankly. And if there's, for me, those are probably the core Victory Games greatest games, I think. Korean War, Civil War, and Vietnam 65 to 75. And I don't say Pacific War only because I didn't play it until last year, but so kind of, yeah. I don't really like the Plantagenet cover either, to be completely honest. But it's, I don't think it's dreadful. I'm not crazy about it. So but well, maybe we'll revisit that, but it might or might not be next week. We'll see what happens. But there was I guess we got like 2 minutes here. So
Yeah.
I think the kind of the takeaway is kind of to highlight the differences kind of between what the output was like, right? The experimentalism from SPI, and yet the sort of uniform graphic design as opposed to Avalon Hill, which did not have uniform graphic design, but had uniform printing and put out a much lower output per year. But at least in a lot of cases, you'd have maybe they took spent a little more time on them. So
Yeah,
which company had the best font of those two? SPI.
Compared to Avalon Hill?
Oh yeah,
because
Times
I read
Roman.
Simonson.
Times Roman.
I don't know about that.
I do, because here's why. Because I can pick up any SPI rule book except maybe the very, very early ones, and look at a 2-inch by 2-inch cutout of the rule of the text and identify it as an SPI game and say that's an SPI game.
You're nuts.
No, I could totally do that. I could do that with
saying.
TSR too, by the way, but only in a certain window that was like 78 to like 82.
So. No, I know you can do it, but it takes a certain amount of you're nuts to do something that
it's a very distinctive look, right? It's 3 columns, which very few other companies did. And it's Times Roman. It's got a specific like look to it. And I'm not like a fontographer or whatever the hell you'd call somebody like that. But it's just instantly recognizable.
Look at that. We could do a show on typography.
I'd want to get somebody that knows what they're talking about for friggin' typography.
What?
I can see the sense in which this is true, actually, and GDW also changed partway through, right? If you look at like that late 70s to early 80s, which I think is probably what Brant's thinking about, say 75 to 85. I could kind of see where Brant's coming from. It was a 2-column format. It was pretty clean and easy to read, even though it had no illustrations in most cases. There would literally be no illustrations. And GDW, there probably was a window in which GDW did have the best counters, actually. But SPI had good counters too. But toward the end, where the counters got busier and they made everything smaller in an attempt to address potential registration problems, that's where SPI's counters started to become not awesome. And GDW just ignored that registration problem, but sometimes you got a bullshit counter sheet with bad registration. And that's especially disappointing if in 2022 you buy a $350 copy of Scorched Earth and 2 of the counter sheets are unusably misregistered. That's a problem. So if hypothetically somebody were to have had that happen, I did manage to source replacement counter sheets. So one I bought on eBay and one I bought from some helpful individual on the Europa Facebook group.
Well, Kerry Anderson's got the SPI wrecking house,
wrecking yard, the SPI wrecking yard. Yeah. Oh, he'd be a good person to talk to about that, actually. So, I wonder who does. I mean, it's a different discipline now, right? Doing like the layouts and stuff like that's a completely different discipline now than it used to be. I mean, in terms of the mechanics of how you do it, it's all done on a computer now, right? People used to laugh at Kevin Symbiota, who's the main person at Palladium Books, for well into the 2010s, literally doing his layouts with a fucking hot paste machine and cut with scissors and shit. And it's like, you're insane. You're insane. Nobody's doing that anymore. So this, I could see benefits to either side, right? On the one hand, I think the glossier counters wear better, but on the one hand, I think those SPI counters feel better, but they do suck up the grease from your fingers. So,
but you're not supposed to eat when you play games.
Anybody with their greasy pizza fingers touches my game, they're getting a talking to. That shit don't fly. So you go wash your friggin' hands. Go eat your pizza. That's cool. You got to eat, but then you go
don't
wash
touch
your
my
hands
game.
You touch my friggin' counters. So I am happy to yell at people about that. I mean, I'll even yell at people sometimes for touching my dice with dirty fingers, and you can wash those.
That's disgusting.
So, yeah, no kidding. Anyway, all right, folks, we are out of time. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. We may have a guest next week, and we may use the best covers as our next fill-in topic when we just decide me and Dan are going it alone here, which we're kind of shooting for once a month on that, by the way. So, all right, folks, we are out of here. We will see you all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Big move. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big win. The moose is loose. Big moose. Big win. The moose is loose. Big. Big.